everyone, and welcome back to another exciting journey into philosophy through literature. All right, today we're diving into one of the most enigmatic and layered novels of the 20th century, The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This novel isn't just a story, it's a philosophical exploration, a political critique, and a metaphysical puzzle wrapped into one. At the center of our discussion today is the character of the Master, a deeply tragic and complex figure, but also one who serves as a profound philosophical symbol. Let's begin by laying out who the Master is and what he represents in the novel. Then we'll work our way through his journey, his psychology, his relationships, and the key philosophical themes that he embodies. The Master is a writer in Soviet Russia during a time when creativity is suffocated by strict censorship and harsh ideological control. Early on, we get a sense that he's a man who's different from the society around him. He's not interested in conforming to the state's rigid standards or engaging in the propaganda that dominates the literary scene. In fact, he's practically allergic to it. Instead, he's deeply committed to truth, to art, and to a novel that he believes must be written, a novel about Pontius Pilate, an exploration of truth, guilt, and redemption. What Bulgakov does here with the Master is brilliant. He sets him up not just as a character, but as a symbol of the artist struggling against oppression. This introduces us to one of the first philosophical themes, the conflict between individual creativity and collective conformity. The Master's resistance against Soviet norms embodies an age-old philosophical tension, the struggle for freedom in a world that demands uniformity. In many ways, he represents the archetype of the existential hero, one who is willing to risk his safety, his sanity, and his very identity for the pursuit of a higher truth. But that journey is a painful one. The Master is, in every sense, tortured by his commitment. He lives in fear, he's consumed by self-doubt, and eventually he's driven to a state of mental collapse. Here, Bulgakov is almost forcing us to ask, is the pursuit of truth and beauty worth it in a world that punishes it? Let's go a bit deeper into the Master's psychological state. Throughout the novel, we see that he's plagued by an intense loneliness and isolation. When he completes his manuscript, it's almost as if he's created a piece of his own soul, something he's poured his entire being into. But instead of being celebrated, he's rejected. His novel is deemed dangerous and blasphemous. It doesn't fit the prescribed narrative of the regime. The Master retreats into despair, which brings us to the philosophical concept of existential isolation. The idea here is that every individual is ultimately alone in their subjective experience. No one can truly understand the depths of another person's inner world, particularly if that person is an artist or thinker who exists outside the societal norm. One particularly memorable line in the novel captures this perfectly. When the Master meets Margarita, he says, "Did you know that there are things in the world that are worse than death?" It's a chilling line, isn't it? For the Master, that worse than death is the soul-crushing reality of being unable to share his work, his truth with the world. This quote strikes at the heart of existentialism, where true despair arises not from fear of death, but from the lack of meaning, from the realization that society often ignores, or even punishes, authenticity and individuality. Bulgakov shows us that despair, for the Master, isn't a fleeting emotion, it's a way of being. His identity as a writer and truth seeker is inseparable from his suffering. And in a way, this suffering almost becomes a badge of honor, marking him as someone who's brave enough to confront reality, even when it's dark. Now, while the Master is often consumed by despair, he's not entirely alone in his journey. Enter Margarita. Margarita is the one person who believes in the Master's work, who sees him not as a failure or as someone insane, but as a man of integrity, courage, and vision. Her devotion to him is absolute, and she becomes his salvation in a world that seeks to erase him. In philosophical terms, Margarita represents the concept of redemptive love. Love here isn't just romantic, it's a profound existential commitment. Jean-Paul Sartre, a philosopher who wrote extensively on existentialism, would argue that Margarita's love affirms the Master's existence. To be loved, Sartre claimed, is to be seen in our totality, flaws and all, and still be accepted. Margarita's love is a form of validation that saves the Master from total annihilation, from falling entirely into the abyss of despair. One of the most moving passages in the book is when Margarita, in her own dark night of the soul, makes a pact with the devil to save the Master. She's willing to go to hell and back to restore him and his work. This passage is one of the novel's most emotionally charged, as it underscores the idea that love has the power to transcend even the most oppressive forces. In a world where everything has turned its back on the master, Margarita's love stands as a bulwark, a fierce testament to the possibility of redemption. And speaking of the devil, let's talk about his role in the master's journey. The devil, or Woland, is a strange, ambivalent figure in the Master and Margarita. Unlike the typical literary portrayal of the devil as purely evil, Woland is more complex, almost an agent of balance, dispensing justice and bringing truth to light in his own twisted way. Through Woland, Bulgakov explores the philosophical ambiguity of good and evil. Woland's actions might seem cruel, he brings chaos, he exposes the hypocrisies of Moscow's elite, but he also plays a crucial role in the master's redemption. By the novel's end, it is Woland who, in a strange twist of fate, allows the master and Margarita to find peace together. This portrayal of the devil forces us to confront our own preconceptions of good and evil. Bulgakov seems to suggest that moral categories aren't as black and white as we'd like them to be. Sometimes it's the forces that we perceive as dark or dangerous that actually reveal the truth and bring about justice. In this sense, Woland embodies a kind of moral relativism, showing us that in a world as complex as ours, good and evil are often intertwined, each giving meaning to the other. Now, one of the novel's most profound themes is the question of faith and redemption. The master's story runs parallel to the story of Pontius Pilate, who is haunted by his own actions during the trial of Jesus. Through these two narratives, Bulgakov raises the question, can we be forgiven for our mistakes, our failures, and our betrayals? For the master, this question is deeply personal. His work on Pilate's story becomes his own confession, his way of grappling with guilt and the meaning of forgiveness. He believes that there is a higher truth, a higher justice that transcends the political and social realities around him, but his faith in this truth is constantly tested by the brutal world he lives in. One of the most striking moments in the novel is when the master finally receives peace. It's not exactly the traditional redemption of heaven, but rather an escape from suffering, a place of rest where he's freed from the torment of his unfulfilled dreams. Bulgakov seems to be suggesting that redemption is less about absolution and more about finding inner peace. This idea is deeply spiritual, but it's also practical. Sometimes, what we need isn't forgiveness from others, but forgiveness from ourselves. To wrap up, let's talk about the emotional impact of the master's journey. The Master and Margarita isn't just a novel you read, it's one you feel. It's a story that resonates on a deep, existential level. The master's life is filled with suffering, self-doubt, and isolation, but it's also filled with love, courage, and a relentless pursuit of truth. Reading about the master, we're moved not just by his pain, but by his resilience. He reminds us of the cost of being true to ourselves in a world that often demands conformity. The master's journey is a reminder that while the pursuit of truth may be lonely, it's also noble. In a way, the master becomes a tragic hero, sacrificing himself for a cause greater than himself. And that's the beauty of Bulgakov's work. It shows us that life is filled with paradoxes, light and dark, good and evil, love and despair. The master story captures the essence of what it means to be human, to be fragile yet resilient, flawed yet capable of extraordinary courage. So, in the end, what can we learn from the master? Perhaps that we must find our own truth, our own redemption. And that while the world may be unforgiving, it's in our relationships and in our acts of love and bravery that we find meaning. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the Master and Margarita. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember that sometimes the path to truth is the most treacherous, but also the most rewarding. If you found this video thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more philosophical explorations. See you next time.